When Carl Jung spoke about the journey of becoming oneself, he didn't speak in terms of achievement, titles, or recognition. He spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. It is a word that sounds almost clinical, almost heavy, but at its heart, it is the most human of needs, the need to become who we truly are, not who the world tells us to be, not who we pretend to be, but who we actually are in the deepest chambers of our being. And that, my friends, is no small task in a world filled with noise. Everywhere we look, there is a chorus of voices, advertisers telling us what we must buy, influencers telling us what we must look like, families and communities reminding us of what we ought to do, even our own inner critic whispering the lines of scripts that do not belong to us. In this storm of expectations, individuation is Jung's call to silence the clamor long enough to hear the unmistakable sound of your own voice. Now, let me be clear. Individuation is not about isolation. It's not about rejecting society or withdrawing into a cave. It is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. No, Jung saw individuation as integration. It is the bringing together of all the parts of ourselves, conscious and unconscious, light and dark, masculine and feminine, spiritual and material, into a greater whole. It is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. And in a world that thrives on superficiality, reality, true authenticity, is revolutionary. Think about it. How many of us live our lives trying to fit into molds that were never made for us? From the time we are children, we are shaped, guided, and often pressured to conform. We are told who we should admire, what kind of career we should chase, what kind of relationships we should pursue, and even what kind of personality we ought to have. And if we're honest, many of us wear masks so long that we begin to confuse the mask with our face. But individuation is about daring to take off the mask, to stand in the mirror, and ask, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I am no longer performing? Who am I when I listen only to the whisper of my soul? The problem is, listening is hard in this world. Noise is everywhere, and the noise is seductive. Social media algorithms are designed to tell us who we should be, what we should care about, who we should envy, and what we should fear. Families, even with the best of intentions, often hand down stories of who we must be, stories they themselves inherited from generations past. Friends, peers, colleagues, they all hold mirrors up to us, but mirrors that reflect their projections, their expectations, their shadows. And so many of us lose sight of ourselves in the reflection of others. But individuation asks us to step out of that hall of mirrors and seek the ground beneath our feet. It asks us to travel inward, to navigate the hidden terrains of the unconscious, to gather the fragments we have scattered and denied, and to make of them a life that is truly ours. It is the slow, courageous work of integrating who we are with who we have pretended to be. It is a sacred process. Let me tell you this, individuation is not glamorous. It is not instantly gratifying. It does not come with applause. Often it begins with discomfort. Sometimes with pain. Because the first step to becoming yourself is realizing you have been living as someone else. And that realization can shatter illusions you have built for years. But that shattering, that breaking apart, is necessary. Because only when the false falls away can the real emerge. Jung used to say that individuation is like walking a path that no one else can walk for you. You can have guides, mentors, therapists, friends, but at the end of the day, it is your path. You cannot borrow another person's map. You cannot wear another person's shoes. Your soul has its own landscape, its own valleys, its own mountains, its own rivers. And until you walk it, until you come to know it, you will remain a stranger to yourself. And isn't that one of the greatest tragedies of life? To live for decades and realize you have never truly met yourself. That you have been playing a role, living someone else's story, rehearsing lines that were never meant for your mouth. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of human life was not success in the conventional sense, but wholeness. To become whole is to embrace the totality of who we are, the bright parts that we proudly show, and the darker parts we bury in the shadows. And let's be honest, the world does not reward wholeness. It rewards performance. It rewards specialization. It rewards conformity. It rewards those who play the role convincingly. And so, many of us become experts at playing roles, so good at it that we lose the courage to step off the stage. But individuation demands that courage. It demands the willingness to stop performing long enough to actually live. Now, you may be wondering, what does this look like in practice? How do we begin the journey of individuation in such a noisy world? Jung would say, start with awareness. Awareness of the unconscious. Awareness of the inner dialogues that shape you. Pay attention to your dreams. Your dreams are the language of the unconscious, the whispers of your soul in symbolic form. They are not random. They are not meaningless. They are messages, guidance, invitations to integrate what you have ignored. And beyond dreams, pay attention to your emotions, especially the ones you resist. When you feel jealousy, resentment, anger, don't dismiss them. Don't suppress them. Ask, what is this telling me about myself? What part of me have I rejected that is now calling for attention? Individuation requires curiosity about the parts of ourselves we least want to see. It also requires honesty about the masks we wear. We all have a persona, our social face, the mask we put on to navigate the world. That's not inherently bad. We need personas to function. But the danger comes when we mistake the persona for the self. When we believe the performance is all there is. Individuation invites us to take off the costume, even if only in private, and meet the person beneath it. And let me say this, meeting that person is not always easy. Sometimes what you find is not flattering. Sometimes you find wounds you've been avoiding. Sometimes you find desires you've been suppressing. Sometimes you find contradictions that make you question who you thought you were. But all of that is part of the process. You cannot be whole by clinging only to the parts of yourself that feel comfortable. Wholeness means embracing the totality. And as you do, something shifts. You begin to walk differently in the world. You are less swayed by the noise of others, less defined by external approval, less enslaved by comparison. You begin to live a life that is not reactive but rooted. A life that reflects the contours of your own soul, not the expectations of the crowd. That is individuation. It is the slow, often invisible work of becoming yourself. And in a world that constantly tempts you to be anyone but yourself, this is an act of radical courage. So I want to invite you, as you leave this space today, to reflect deeply on this. What masks am I wearing? What voices in my life are not my own? What whispers of my soul have I been ignoring? And most importantly, am I willing to walk the path of becoming myself, even if it is not the easiest, even if it is not the most applauded, even if it is not the most understood? Because, in the end, the world does not need another copy, another performer, another echo of the same noise. The world needs you. The world needs the unrepeatable, irreplaceable, indivisible truth of who you are. And that, as Jung knew so well, is the secret to finding yourself in a world of noise. Do not spend your life rehearsing someone else's script. Step onto the stage of your own soul, and live the role only you were born to play. When Jung spoke about silence, he wasn't simply asking us to retreat from the world or escape responsibility. He was pointing us toward a truth that's easy to miss. In the middle of all the clamor, the chatter, the demands, there exists a quiet center. And that quiet center is where the soul lives. Now think about the world we live in today. Every moment is filled. Noise is not just sound, it's distraction, it's interruption, it's the endless feed of information that pours into our minds from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep. Before our eyes even adjust to daylight, most of us reach for our phones. We scroll, we check, we consume. We are surrounded by voices, opinions, news, commentary, laughter, outrage, advertisements, all of it rushing at us, demanding attention. And somewhere in the middle of that flood, the voice of the self, the inner voice, becomes almost impossible to hear. And Jung understood something fundamental about that silence: it is not empty. It is full. It is the space in which the unconscious speaks. The psyche does not shout, it whispers. It sends us signals through dreams, through images, through gut feelings, through subtle longings. But if our lives are crowded with constant noise, those whispers get drowned out. We confuse the noise of the world with the guidance of our soul. You know, when Oprah talks about the importance of stillness, she always reminds us that your life is always speaking to you. And Jung would have agreed. He believed that the unconscious communicates with us constantly. But the problem is not that it doesn't speak, it's that we don't listen. Or rather, we don't create the conditions to listen. Listening requires silence. And silence is not something the modern world encourages. In fact, silence can feel uncomfortable, even threatening. Have you noticed that? That so many of us fill the gaps in conversation, turn on music while we drive, watch television while we eat, put a podcast on while we walk. We are uncomfortable with quiet because in the quiet, something rises up. And often that something is the truth we've been avoiding. But here's the paradox: the very thing we fear in silence is the thing we need most. Because it is in silence that we meet ourselves. I want you to imagine this for a moment. Imagine standing on the edge of a vast lake at dawn. The water is still, the air is calm, and there's a hush all around. In that stillness, you can see reflections. The trees, the sky, even yourself standing at the edge, all mirrored perfectly in the water's surface. But now imagine if that lake is stormy, waves crashing, wind howling, surface constantly disturbed. You cannot see a reflection. You cannot see clearly. The psyche is like that. Without silence, without calm, without stillness, we cannot see the reflection of our own soul. That is why Jung placed so much importance on cultivating an inner life. And cultivating an inner life requires time with silence. Now, silence doesn't always mean literal absence of sound. It means absence of distraction. It means giving ourselves permission to be with ourselves, without performance, without constant input, without the pressure to react. And that is not easy in a culture where productivity is worshipped and stillness is mistaken for laziness. But think about it: what is more important than making contact with your own being? What is more valuable than being able to hear your own soul speak? We have to reframe silence not as emptiness but as nourishment. Silence is not a void. Silence is a presence. It is presence. In the quiet, we discover depth. In the quiet, we discover meaning. And here's where the psychological depth comes in. Jung believed that silence allows us to access what he called the collective unconscious, that deep reservoir of archetypes, images, and wisdom that connects us all. When you are silent, when you allow the mind to settle, you begin to touch that depth. You begin to access guidance that feels larger than yourself, as though you are drawing not just from your own experience but from something timeless, something universal. That is why so many great spiritual traditions emphasize silence, because silence is the doorway to wisdom. Now, let's be honest, silence also brings us face to face with our pain. And that is often why we resist it. When we slow down, when we stop running from distraction to distraction, the things we have been suppressing begin to surface. Old wounds, unresolved conflicts, uncomfortable truths, they rise up in the silence. And our instinct is to run back to the noise, to drown it out again. But Jung taught that those very things that surface are the gold. That pain, those shadows, those forgotten pieces of ourselves, they are not there to harm us, they are there to heal us. So the work is to stay. To stay in the silence long enough for the truth to reveal itself. To resist the temptation to flee back into noise. Because on the other side of that discomfort is clarity, is strength, is authenticity. Let me tell you something, you cannot find yourself in the noise. You cannot hear your calling in the chaos. You cannot align with your deepest truth while scrolling endlessly, while numbing endlessly, while running endlessly. You have to stop. You have to be still. And when you do, something remarkable happens. You begin to notice things you never noticed before. You begin to feel an inner compass that was always there but obscured. You begin to distinguish between the voices that are yours and the voices that are not. That is the gift of silence. This is not about withdrawing from the world forever. It's about learning to create spaces of stillness within it. Maybe it's 5 minutes in the morning before anyone else wakes up. Maybe it's a walk without your phone. Maybe it's sitting quietly at the end of the day and simply breathing. These moments of silence, practiced consistently, begin to open a channel between you and your deeper self. And here's the beauty, when you connect with silence, when you anchor yourself in it, you can carry that silence into the noise. You can stand in the middle of the chaos and still feel centered, still feel grounded, still feel connected to your own voice. Silence, once cultivated, becomes portable. It becomes an inner resource you can draw upon at any moment. Jung's insight here is profound. The psyche has its own rhythm, its own timing, its own wisdom. But it will not scream to compete with the noise of the world. It will not chase you down. It waits patiently for you to quiet yourself enough to hear it. And so the invitation is simple, but it is not easy. Create silence. Guard it. Nurture it. Honor it. Because in that silence, you will find guidance that no social feed can give you, wisdom that no expert can give you, truth that no noise can replace. And the question I want to leave with you today is this: when was the last time you truly listened to yourself? Not to your fears. Not to your ambitions. Not to the voices of others echoing in your head. But to you. To the deep you. To the still, small voice within that has been waiting, patiently, lovingly, quietly, for you to return. Because in the end, silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of self. In a world that will never stop shouting, dare to be the one who listens, to the silence, to the soul, to yourself. Carl Jung said something that still stirs the heart every time I return to it: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. What he meant was that growth, healing, and authenticity don't come from avoiding what is uncomfortable, from polishing only the parts of ourselves we like, from pretending we are all light and goodness. No. Real transformation comes when we face the parts of ourselves we'd rather not see. It comes when we turn toward what Jung called the shadow. Now let's be honest. We live in a culture that teaches us to hide the shadow. From childhood, we are rewarded when we behave, when we conform, when we present only the parts of ourselves that are acceptable. Anger is punished. Vulnerability is discouraged. Jealousy, greed, lust, insecurity, these things are tucked away, locked in a box. And the longer they stay hidden, the more we convince ourselves they don't exist. But Jung warned us. The shadow does not disappear just because we deny it. What we push down, what we repress, what we refuse to acknowledge, that does not vanish. It grows stronger. And it leaks out in ways we don't expect. Have you ever wondered why you overreact in certain situations? Why a small comment from someone can make you furious? Why you judge other people so harshly for qualities you claim you don't have? That's the shadow at work. The parts of ourselves we can't face within, we project outward. We condemn in others what we secretly cannot accept in ourselves. And so the shadow doesn't just shape our inner life, it shapes our relationships, our work, our communities. Jung believed that one of the greatest tasks of life is not to get rid of the shadow, but to integrate it. To face it honestly, to make peace with it, to learn from it. Because hidden inside the shadow is not just darkness. It also carries energy, vitality, creativity, and truth. The very things we repress are often the very things that, once embraced, make us whole. But facing the shadow is not easy. It requires courage. It requires honesty. And it requires the willingness to see ourselves without filters. Because let's face it, most of us prefer to see ourselves in the best light. We cling to the image we want the world to see, the kind friend, the reliable worker, the patient parent, the responsible adult. But if we look closer, if we dare to really look, we may find resentment simmering under that kindness, exhaustion behind that reliability, frustration beneath that patience. These truths don't make us bad. They make us human. And when we deny them, we become fractured. Now imagine what happens when instead of denying, you allow yourself to face them. Imagine what happens when you admit, yes, I get jealous. Yes, I get angry. Yes, I have desires I don't always understand. Yes, I have fears that sometimes run my life. When you admit those things, you begin to reclaim parts of yourself that have been exiled. You begin to integrate. And integration is power. Jung saw the shadow as not just personal but also collective. Entire societies have shadows, qualities they deny, histories they bury, injustices they refuse to face. And just like in the individual, what is denied in the collective does not disappear. It festers. It erupts. It shows itself in cycles of violence, prejudice, and conflict. The healing of the world depends on the healing of our shadows. And that begins with the courage of individuals who are willing to look inward. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you really examined your judgments of others? Think of the last person who irritated you, offended you, or provoked you. What quality in them set you off? Often, the shadow reveals itself in those moments. Because the qualities we dislike most in others are often mirrors of something unresolved within us. If you are willing to pause and ask, why does this bother me so much? you begin to uncover the shadow. And what once felt like a threat can become an opportunity for growth. But here's the important part: facing the shadow is not about shame. It's not about beating yourself up for being flawed. It's about compassion. It's about saying to yourself, even my darkness belongs. Even my flaws, my mistakes, my fears, they are part of my story. And when you approach the shadow with compassion instead of condemnation, it begins to transform. What once felt like an enemy becomes a teacher. Think about the qualities you've repressed in your life. Maybe you were taught as a child that it wasn't okay to express anger. So you grew up suppressing it, pretending it didn't exist. But suppressed anger doesn't go away, it sneaks out in passive aggression, in resentment, in illness. When you finally turn toward that anger, when you listen to it, you may discover it was trying to tell you something, that your boundaries were being crossed, that your needs were not being met, that your voice mattered. The shadow is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to wake you up. The same is true for jealousy. Most of us feel ashamed of envy. We don't want to admit it. But envy, when acknowledged, points to desire. It points to something you long for, something you have not yet claimed. If you face it honestly, envy can guide you toward your own path instead of leaving you stuck resenting others for theirs. This is the alchemy of shadow work. What you once thought of as weakness can become strength, what you once feared can become wisdom. But the transformation only happens when you face it. And so the journey of individuation that Jung spoke of, the journey of becoming whole, cannot happen without this step. You cannot become whole by only embracing your light. You must also embrace your darkness. You must say yes to the fullness of who you are. Because wholeness is not perfection. Wholeness is integration. I want you to take a moment and imagine what it would feel like to live without fear of your own shadow. Imagine what it would feel like to stop hiding, to stop pretending, to stop running from yourself. Imagine the energy, the freedom, the relief of standing in your truth, even the parts of it that are messy, complicated, imperfect. That is the gift of shadow work. It frees you to be real. And when you are real, when you are integrated, you carry a different presence in the world. You are no longer triggered so easily, no longer projecting your denied parts onto others, no longer living in fear of being found out. You become grounded. You become compassionate, not only with yourself but with others. Because when you have faced your own shadow, you no longer need to condemn others for theirs. You understand. You see yourself in them. And that understanding is what heals relationships, what heals communities, what heals the world. But the question is, will you face it? Will you step into that uncomfortable, vulnerable, challenging space of looking honestly at yourself? Most people don't. Most people choose the comfort of denial, the illusion of light without darkness. But if you want to be whole, if you want to be free, if you want to live authentically, you cannot avoid this work. And let me tell you this, you are strong enough for it. You are brave enough for it. The shadow is not bigger than you. It is part of you. And when you integrate it, you will find yourself more powerful, more alive, more yourself than you have ever been. So I leave you with this thought: the shadow is not the enemy. The shadow is the doorway. Step through it, and you step into the fullness of who you are. Do not run from your darkness, walk into it, embrace it, and you will discover the light that was hidden there all along. Jung often said that the great problem of our time is that we no longer live with a sense of myth. What he meant is that modern life has stripped itself of symbols, of deep meaning, of those images and stories that give us a connection to something larger than ourselves. We are drowning in information but starving for wisdom. We are surrounded by noise but cut off from meaning. And yet, the human soul has always needed meaning the way the body needs air. From the beginning of history, people have told stories, created rituals, painted images, carved figures, all as a way to connect their small daily lives to something vast and eternal. Jung called this living a symbolic life. And what he saw, as a psychiatrist and as a student of cultures, is that when people lose their symbols, they lose their center. They lose touch with the deeper currents of life. Now, you might ask, what does that mean for us? In a world of smartphones, deadlines, bills, responsibilities. What does it mean to live a symbolic life? It doesn't mean escaping into fantasy or pretending we are back in some ancient village. It means rediscovering the deeper meaning in the ordinary moments of our lives. It means learning to see not just with the eyes of logic but with the eyes of the soul. Think about your own life. How often do you move through the day on autopilot? You wake up, you go to work, you answer emails, you eat, you sleep, and then you do it all again. Days blur into weeks, weeks blur into years. But in all of this, have you stopped to ask, what does it mean? Not just, what am I doing, but what is the deeper story of my life? What symbols guide me? What greater narrative am I a part of? Jung believed that the unconscious speaks to us in symbols, through dreams, through images, through synchronicities, those moments that feel like more than coincidence. And when we ignore those symbols, when we reduce life to only the literal, we become spiritually starved. We may succeed outwardly, but inwardly, we feel hollow. The symbolic life is the antidote to that hollowness. It is what happens when you start to notice that your life is not random, that your struggles, your challenges, your joys, your losses, they are not just accidents. They are part of a story unfolding. They are filled with meaning, if you are willing to look. For example, think about dreams. In our culture, we are often taught to dismiss dreams as nonsense, just the brain firing off at night. But Jung spent decades showing us that dreams are symbolic messages from the unconscious. They are not literal, but they are deeply meaningful. When a patient of his dreamt of being chased by a lion, Jung didn't say, "Oh, you must stay away from zoos." He asked, what does the lion symbolize? What power, what instinct, what suppressed energy in your life is demanding to be acknowledged? That is the symbolic life, learning to see not just the surface but the deeper image. And it is not just dreams. Everyday life is filled with symbols if we pay attention. A recurring pattern in your relationships, a piece of music that always stirs your soul, a challenge that keeps appearing until you finally face it, these are not random. They are invitations from life to step into greater awareness, greater wholeness. But here's the problem. We are taught to ignore symbols. We are taught to value only what can be measured, quantified, explained. And so we miss the deeper meaning. We rush past the very signs that could guide us, heal us, connect us. And in doing so, we live shallow lives. We live on the surface, when our souls are crying out for depth. Living a symbolic life does not mean abandoning reason. It means adding another layer of vision. It means saying, yes, this event happened, but what is its meaning for me? What is life trying to teach me here? What is the deeper story being told? When you begin to live symbolically, even the hardest experiences become transformed. Suffering stops being meaningless. Instead, it becomes initiation. Pain becomes part of a larger pattern of growth. Loss becomes not just an ending, but also the opening of a new chapter. Jung saw this again and again in his patients. When people could see their pain symbolically, it no longer crushed them. It gave them strength. Because they began to realize, this is not random. This is part of my journey. This is shaping me into who I am meant to be. Let me ask you, what story are you living right now? What myth shapes your life? For many of us, we are unconsciously living out stories handed down by family, culture, or society. Stories about success, about gender, about love, about worth. Some of these stories uplift us, but many of them trap us. Jung's invitation was to step out of unconscious stories and begin to consciously choose the story you are living. To find the symbols that truly resonate with your soul. Maybe for you, the symbol is the phoenix, rising from the ashes of difficulty stronger than before. Maybe it is the journey of the pilgrim, constantly seeking, learning, growing. Maybe it is the healer, the warrior, the lover, the sage. These are not just old myths. They are archetypes, patterns of meaning that live in all of us. And when you claim one consciously, you begin to live with intention. You begin to see your life as a story with depth and direction. And here's what happens when you do: you begin to experience synchronicity. Jung coined this word to describe those moments when the inner world and the outer world line up, when you think of an old friend and they call you, when a book falls into your lap at the exact moment you needed its message, when life feels like it is speaking directly to you. Synchronicity is the universe's way of affirming, yes, you are on the path. Yes, you are connected. Yes, you are living symbolically. Living symbolically is not about superstition. It is not about forcing meaning into everything. It is about learning to listen. Listening to life as if it were a dialogue, not a monologue. Listening as if the world is alive, as if your soul is speaking to you through every encounter, every challenge, every dream. And when you live that way, the noise of the world begins to lose its power. You are no longer just tossed about by random events. You feel anchored. You feel guided. You feel connected to something larger, something timeless. And that connection gives you resilience. It gives you hope. It gives you purpose. Think about how different our world would be if more people lived this way. If instead of chasing only status and possessions, people sought meaning. If instead of dismissing suffering as meaningless, people saw it as part of a larger story. If instead of feeling isolated, people recognized themselves as part of a living web of symbols and archetypes that connect us all. That is the symbolic life. And it is not reserved for mystics or monks. It is available to all of us, here and now, in the middle of our ordinary lives. So the question is, will you open your eyes to it? Will you take the risk of seeing your life not just as a series of tasks and events, but as a living story, a meaningful journey, a myth unfolding? Will you allow the symbols that arise in your dreams, your challenges, your synchronicities, to guide you instead of ignoring them? Because here is the truth: without symbols, life is flat. With symbols, life is luminous. Without symbols, suffering is despair. With symbols, suffering is transformation. Without symbols, we are lost in the noise. With symbols, we find our way back to the soul. And so I invite you, as you leave here, to begin paying attention. To your dreams. To the patterns in your life. To the images that stir your heart. To the synchronicities that whisper, there is more here than meets the eye. Begin to live as if life itself were speaking to you, because it is. The symbolic life is not a luxury. It is not an extra. It is essential. Because to live without symbols is to live without meaning. And to live without meaning is not to live at all. Do not settle for a life on the surface. Step into the depth of symbols, and you will find that even in the ordinary, the extraordinary has been waiting for you all along.